Hello developers, writers, and everyone who loves game design.
Welcome to DLC Not Included, our weekly podcast where we discuss game development, the industry, and everything in between.
We're your hosts, Steele
and Teal. Glad you could join us.
So, interesting side note, last night, or the other night at our AMA, one of our viewers asked us what goes into the creation of these podcasts, and we kind of broke it down, and quite a bit of research can go into these episodes.
Absolutely. There's just a lot of thought that goes into it, and a lot of planning.
And this particular episode is going to be very much that, because it's over a topic that we feel is really important to developers, and even more so is one that takes quite a bit of work on the back end.
Yes,
but
it does.
If it does work, your game becomes that much better. So what is our topic?
Today's topic is game balancing.
Okay, so quick note before we get started, guys. This is a high-level overview on how to balance your game. This does not include exact examples.
No.
Before we get started, I do want to give a shout-out if you're listening to this live, and if you're listening to this on Spotify, iHeartRadio, etc., lots of love to you as well.
Yeah, thank you.
So we're going to probably want to start where we usually do, with a definition. Now, we were able to tag a strict one.
Yes, I actually found a good one from technopedia.com.
All right, read it out, Jill.
A video game design concept where the strengths of a character or a particular strategy are offset by a proportional drawback in another area to prevent domination of one character or gaming approach.
Would you like a little dressing with that word, Sam?
I know.
That's a mouthful.
I think we need to break this down.
Yeah, it's a mouthful. It's a mouthful. Tell you what, why don't you hit the high points, and I'll go ahead and kind of go a little deeper into each one. So what's the first part we wanted to say?
Okay, well, the first part of it is strengths of a character.
Okay, so when we talk about the strengths of a character, we're talking about what the character that the player is controlling.
Yes.
What they're capable of, what they bring to the table. Whether they're bringing to the table accuracy, physical power, agility, magical powers.
Some kind of magic, yeah.
Right. Whether they can move the environment around with telekinesis, if they're able to turn invisible, if they can go through walls.
Or if they're just extremely lucky.
Right. If they have, if things just go around them. If they have some way of analyzing an area like Batman's detective
That's
vision.
true, yeah.
These are all strengths of a character. These are things that you as the developer put into your character that make your character have the advantage.
Yes.
All right, what's our next one?
So along with strengths of character, you also need to have focus on particular strategy.
Right. So the other part of this definition, when it's talking about game balancing, is marrying what the character's capable of with what you, the player, can pull off. And this is assuming that your players have a modicum of skill. For example, going back to the Arkham games, if you're really good at the rhythm of punching and counter-striking and using the batarang, etc., you can make Batman, if you're skilled, really, really shine when beating up a group of thugs.
Right.
Batman's combos are the character strength, the things that are baked into what the character can do. While the strategy would be, punch, punch, block, punch, punch, takedown, dodge, dodge, batarang. That's a particular strategy that a player would employ in that particular moment. Another one would be using cover.
Oh, yeah.
Like an FPS. Strategic use of cover. The Fallout 4 character, the lone sole survivor. VATS would be a strength, and use of the VATS strategically to cripple limbs would be a particular strategy.
That's right.
Okay, so moving on.
So to counterbalance that, you need to have a proportional drawback. That's your offset.
Right. So now we're talking about things like, VATS, for example, having a relatively low percentage rate on stuff like the limbs or the head until perks are employed.
Yeah.
With Batman, he actually, gets hit pretty hard with some of those attacks. Like if a gun hits him, that actually can take off a significant part of his defense, unless of course his armor has been buffed. But these are all proportional drawbacks. Things like damage modifiers are a really good example. Dragon Quest XI, a proportional drawback is in Act 2 and 3, boss enemies hit frequently extremely hard, so that if you're not employing those strategies, you do get beat very easily.
Yeah, you do.
By those Act 2 and Act 3 bosses.
Yeah.
And then the last piece.
And then, of course, You have to prevent domination.
Right. Domination is when a player employs the same strategy over and over again, or just uses the one power of a character to absolutely wreck what you're doing, to wreck your game. That would be like if Batman had like a hit-all power where everyone flies in the air. You know, or if the Sole Survivor had infinite mini nukes.
Yeah.
With the Fat Man.
Or spamming the special attack button.
Spamming the special
over and over.
Over and over and over again with no cost, no penalty.
Yeah.
And it's the other side as well. You want to prevent domination of your AIs against the player, to where like the player enters an area and they just get swarmed and then they're destroyed before they even have a chance to press the button. We're not talking like in an RPG where, oh, obviously we're not supposed to go to this area right now, or obviously this boss is supposed to beat us in 3 hits because it's cinema. We're talking about during regular gameplay, either the player dominates your game or the game dominates your player. That's when you're going to say, okay, I have a balancing issue.
Yep.
So we just gave you a ton of technicality. So let's just break it down to layman's terms.
So in layman's terms, you want to know what the player can do to win. Plain and simple. What can the player do to win?
And that's not just the game in general. That's each section, each piece.
Each section, each piece.
Right.
And along with that, you as the developer need to create some dynamic obstacles, okay, to keep them from easily winning.
Yeah, you're not...
You know, it's no fun just to, you know, fast track through a dungeon that you've never been in before.
Right.
Killing everything in, you know, one shots and then getting the treasure at the end. How boring is that?
And it's also no fun to walk into an area and get blicked before you even have a chance to touch the controller. That's
the other side of it, yeah.
So your to the layman's terms, the layman's terms is game balancing is knowing what the player can do to win and what you can do to stop the player from winning, and
you got to make that so that neither of those overpowers the other.
Yeah.
It's plain and simple. It's a balance.
Yeah, it's got to be a balance. So when you balance your game, you are making it so that the player has to put as much effort into winning as you, the developer's AIs, put into the player losing. They need to be as balanced and as close to each other as possible so that it's more about the player's skill and the advantages that they create during the game for their character, like buying perks that make certain things easier, learning new combos, getting a new weapon, crafting their own weapon. I'm looking at you, Skyrim players, you know, doing things that make it easier for you. That's where the player victory comes from, not just because the game is unbalanced. Yeah. Or the other way around, they have a fighting chance and aren't just annihilated.
Yeah.
So there are multiple methods to balance your game. We specifically are going to go over 2 of them that we find to be extremely useful. Now, like everything else that Studio Blue discusses, this is only a suggested roadmap based off of our experiences and our knowledge. This is not a end-all, be-all. There are other ways to do it.
Your mileage may vary, but this one method I'm going to talk about is one that I use a lot.
Yes.
And that is using a spreadsheet to balance your game.
This is going to be really useful for all you RPG developers out there, but anyone can use this.
Oh, yeah. And let me just say this. I recommend spreadsheets either through Excel or OpenOffice.
Yeah.
I've found that using Google Sheets is very limited. It doesn't have all the functions that Excel and OpenOffice have.
And while Google Sheets continues to improve every iteration of whatever it is Google does, we've never come encountered with anything that beats.
No.
We personally use Excel.
I use Excel.
But every one of our friends who use OpenOffice say that it's just as functional.
It's just as functional, yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, when you got your spreadsheet, add in everything, all the data that is relevant to the characters, the obstacles, the enemies,
and
everything that has a number, put it down.
Thank you, Teal. When we say everything, we mean everything. If it is numerically represented in your game, it goes in the spreadsheet. And I think that is where, sorry, I'm talking a lot of game developers fall flat.
Yeah.
Is that they underput what is in the spreadsheet for balancing.
Put everything in there.
Everything.
Trust me. If you do that, you're not going to lose track of anything.
Right.
You're not going to, oh my gosh, I forgot this over here. No, you put it all in the spreadsheet. Remember, you can always take away but it's a lot harder to think and add.
Right.
So put it all in there.
And just remember this, guys. Everything's a variable. You may not think it's a variable, but everything is a variable. Everything that's in your game can influence how your game runs.
Oh, yeah.
You know, going outside of game balancing for 1 second, we've talked about the UX. So even something like a bad UI or bad timing in a scenario or a camera issue.
Man, gosh, I'm just thinking about all the games where I've seen that.
Yeah.
We're talking, AAA games.
Yeah, like where the camera swings behind something. But that is outside the scope of game balancing.
That's outside the scope of game balancing.
But you as the developer need to remember everything that is in your game is a variable you need to consider part of the player user experience.
Right.
Okay, so let's
getting back to the spreadsheets. Okay, so you put down all your data in there, all your numbers. And once all that's down, you're going to create your algorithms and your formulas.
Right.
Okay. I cannot stress this enough. Formulas are going to drive your work.
Yeah.
They're going to show. I guess the best way to describe this is you want to show how much of an action.
Yes. What those balances
that you can do.
Right. Those actions you're trying to balance.
Right.
So let's quantify that. When we're saying how much an action that you're trying to balance, so you're trying to balance like a damage control.
Yeah, I'd say let's do damage as damage. A big example.
Right. So formulas for damage, for example, they could be things like let's talk about how much damage characters can do to enemies. There we go. Yeah. That's a good one. Or how much enemies can do to characters. The basic concept of damage in a game, whether it be an RPG, action, FPS, it doesn't matter. So you want to create a formula or an algorithm that shows how much damage a character can do to every enemy.
To this enemy, and that enemy, and the other enemy.
And then you want to create an algorithm or a formula of how much damage each enemy can do to each character.
Right.
And you're thinking to yourself, well, do I really need to have formulas showing what each can do to each? And the answer is
yes.
Unabashedly.
Yes. This is the heart of spreadsheet balancing.
Right.
You've got to put everything in there. Maybe you won't use it.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. It's in the spreadsheet.
It's in the spreadsheet. So if you're a developer listening and you already work and live outside of a spreadsheet for stuff like this, pat yourself on the back. You're halfway there. That is the first obstacle for you as a developer to overcome. Don't be afraid to put in everything, and don't be afraid of the work it takes to put in everything.
Trust me, the work is worth it.
Yeah. But mathematically speaking, it all breaks down to that anyway. What else we got? Okay,
so I was just thinking, aside from damage, there's the flip side, the healing.
Oh, healing.
Healing
yes.
and buffing.
There are so many games that Teal and I play on a regular basis where healing is underpowered.
Yeah.
And it's very obvious that they're just using the default potion heals 50, high potion heals 150, stuff like that.
Right.
And it's like, hey, guys, if your characters are running around with 5,000 health, 50 isn't going to do anything.
No, it's not.
So look at it like that. And that would be exploration as well, wouldn't it? That would really help out.
Yeah. Because the environment damages you.
Right. And people who play RPGs specifically, but any game really, they heal on the field.
Yes.
If you're doing a turn-based RPG, not everyone's going to heal in the battle scene. If you're doing an action RPG, not everyone's going to heal during a fight.
Exactly.
In fact, most people heal. This is
just a
generalization based on my observations. I have only my own anecdotal evidence. Most players I see heal outside of battle. The only time they heal in battle is when a character's about to drop.
Yeah.
And that's anything across the board, regardless of the type of game.
Regardless of the type of game, right. So, yeah, the healing has to also be balanced.
Yes.
Speaking of the environment, encounters.
Oh, boy.
Random or otherwise, but encounter rates.
Games with high encounter rates. And we're not just talking, I know that we're very RPG-centric, Teal and I are, but literally every game out there.
Yeah.
Every game out there where you're constantly getting swarmed by enemies, constantly all the time, is fatigue. It drains the player's endurance, their sanity, and it's very unpleasant.
Yeah.
So when you're balancing, look at each area, and the area can be subjective.
Sure.
It can be like a map, a castle floor, a corridor within the castle, a room within the castle. How many fights is that player getting into? You know, are you just throwing down encounters? Are you just buffing up the encounter rate for filler? Or is there a reason why there are 6 fights inside of this corridor and 3 more inside the room? Can you not accomplish the same level of obstacles with 2 fights in the corridor and 1 fight in the room? Can you do the same? Or 2 fights in the corridor and 0 in the room? Can you not accomplish the same thing? And that's why you need to have this spreadsheet. Numerically look at how often your players are fighting.
Yeah. That's going to help you immensely in gauging your rates.
Yes, exactly.
And so the next thing is I really want to talk about using formulas for your item count.
Go ahead.
Okay. So we always talk about inventory bloat.
Yes.
And inventory bloat occurs because there hasn't been proper balancing.
Pretty much.
You have to strike a balance between giving them, too much items versus not enough items. A perfect example is Dragon Quest XI. I was going through a particular dungeon,
right?
And there were only 2 healing items in that whole little dungeon.
Right, dropped.
Yeah, dropped. Yeah. That's it. And this was a dungeon that had a lot of fire enemies.
It did. So she was taking a lot of damage, and it was very difficult because of that. And at the same time, you can't say, "Oh, well, you should have bought a whole bunch of potions or whatever healing items."
Right.
Before going in, because this dungeon was actually very far away from any town that had a shop. So in this case, there was a balancing issue where Teal would have had to have known ahead of time to buy a more than normal amount of healing items before going from the town to the dungeon. And how would she know that? She's not reading off of a strategy guide. She's not reading a FAQ. She's just playing the game. Now, granted, in the end, it was not nearly as bad as it could have been, but it was still rough on her.
It was very rough. It didn't have to be that way.
Right.
So as a developer, you need to strike that balance. Do we have enough items in the area for the player? And then also look at it. Am I throwing too much out here?
Thank you.
Because I've played in indie games where, there were like tons of antidotes and eye drops and stuff. And I'm like, I'm not using this.
Another thing that you can take into account when you're doing item balancing, so you plug into your spreadsheet all these items for different areas, can the player craft it?
Yeah.
Is there an alchemy system? Because here's the thing. When you're playing a game with healing items, if you have potions at a certain level of cost and you're balancing out your economy, and your economy is very well balanced, and you've balanced out which enemies drop this particular item. We'll just call it Potion X.
Right.
Okay? So Potion X costs a certain amount. You balanced your economy. Potion X is dropped by a certain number of enemies at certain stages. You have that balanced. But then you have Potion X as an alchemical recipe where the reagents are commonly available. Is at that point your balance being destroyed?
Yeah.
Or is that something that the player has to work for so much that it's a balance they tip in their favor through skill and effort?
Yeah,
and that's where you have to ask yourself that question.
Yeah.
If the reagents for Potion X are difficult enough to come by, that the player has to work for it, that they can give themselves twice the number of Potion X's needed, then that's balanced.
Yeah.
But if they can just fart their way through the overworld and make 20 Potion X's really easily, that might be a balancing issue you need to consider.
And I just wanted, this may be a side tangent, but I do want to say this, that I can't tell you the number of dungeons I've been in where snakes and spiders poison you, and you have 0 to 2 antidotes total.
Hey, we do bitch about that. We do indeed. Because, how many antidotes are needed in a dungeon where those encounters occur where a percentage of you can get poisoned? I mean, literally look at it like this. I walk through a dungeon and every enemy can poison me, and I have no antidotes. I've never had a chance to purchase antidotes, so I'm basically walking through the dungeon dying of, envenomated out my ass.
Yep.
I mean, that's a balancing issue, and we laugh at that. But a number of games we've critiqued do that.
Yeah.
So you want to math it when you're
making your spreadsheet and all these numbers you're mathing, and you're going to see the discrepancies.
Having your spreadsheet, okay, here's dungeon 1.
Yeah.
How many enemies can poison?
Yep.
What is their percentage chance of poisoning. Okay, it's relatively high. Okay, great. How many antidotes can the player have at this point? How many have I given them? Because you do want to start by giving them. And then how much can they buy? Okay, where can they buy them? If that starting dungeon, if dungeon 1 doesn't have any way of giving them an antidote, why are you poisoning them?
Exactly. Just ask yourself why.
Why?
And the last little point is, we've been talking about enemy drops and stuff like that, but also chests.
Chest drops.
You're going to have treasure chests in your maps. So you need to look at your spreadsheet and say, well, what do I need in these chests? Is a piece of equipment going to be useful?
Right.
Is an accessory going to be useful or consumable?
Yeah. Because not everything that a player can use to overcome an obstacle and potentially dominate your game, going back to the definition, is a consumable.
Yeah.
Some of it can be accessories that auto heal, accessories that prevent status, et cetera, et cetera. Accessories that bring up their attack.
Right.
Increase their hit percentage, their crit percentage.
Right.
Make them physically move faster for those ARPG and FPS players. If you're doing an RTS, maybe it's a perk or an item that they gain that gives them more actions or allows them to move their hex grid further.
Yeah.
Whatever. These are all things that you need to consider that they can gain.
Right.
And then we talked about economy.
Oh, the in-game economy.
Balance the hell out of that.
Oh.
Balance it. So when you're balancing it, go into your spreadsheet. Okay, first off, let me take a step back because this can be overcomplicated, and I'm pretty sure if I handle it over to a financier, they'll give you a whole bunch of stuff. Break it down like this. 1 unit of currency in your game, that is the basic. What is their equivalent to the US dollar, the British pound, whatever? What is that equivalent? Is it a gold coin, a silver coin, etc.? What can that 1 coin buy?
Yeah.
What can it buy? Okay, it can't buy anything, a meal at a tavern, quote unquote. Okay. What can 5 buy? What can 10 buy? Get to the point where the lowest level of purchase can be made with that coin. And then and then build your numbers from there. So if the lowest thing you can do is for 5 coins buy an antidote, then okay, so that means if I have 100 coins, I can buy 20 antidotes. But when you're balancing your economy, start with the lowest purchase a player can make.
That's right. Because they're going to be starting off with just a low amount of money.
Yeah. Low amount of money. And then when you build that list of items, so you have your 5 gold antidote, your 10 gold potion, etc., you can look and see at every stage of the game what they can buy.
Yeah.
By just looking at the cost. And then when you're giving them those money through drops, money through chests, money through quest rewards, money through, passive income generation, whatever, how many antidotes will that allow them to buy? How many potions will that allow them to buy? And that's an easy thing to do. You just look at, 1,000 and then put in your cells, 1,000 divided by 5 is what? So that's how many antidotes they can buy if they have 1,000 gold.
Right.
1,000 divided by 10, that's how many potions. And you're looking at each stage in the game, what they can buy with a lump sum, and then you give them that lump sum that you want. I want to give them 100. I want them only be able to buy 10 potions or 5 potions and 10 antidotes.
Right.
So I'm going to give them 100 gold. That's how you balance your economy in easy terms.
And here's another thing to consider, and I've seen this in game after game. If you have a piece of equipment available to buy in the shop and you've made it reasonably priced, then don't have it as a chest drop in the next dungeon. And vice versa. I mean, if you have something in a chest drop, then don't let it be available in the shop. Or if you really want to show it in the shop, then have it be such a high price that, oh yeah, I got this free thing in the dungeon. Woohoo, go me. You
might want to consider, and this goes into balancing as well, having those items in chest drops be enhanced versions of what they can buy. For
That's
example,
a good idea.
Yeah, so you can buy a mithril sword in the town. And then you go into the dungeon, and while there may be a mithril sword in there, it's a mithril sword you can't augment, but it has fire element.
Yeah.
So a fire mithril sword. So the one they buy in the town, they can customize with, your materia orbs, making it lightning, ice, fire, whatever. But it does less damage. The mithril fire sword does a little more damage, but it's set as fire. It can't be augmented. So that's a way.
This is all about balancing.
Variations,
right. So, and you will be able to see all this if you have it all in the spreadsheet.
Yeah.
You'll be able to see what is dropped, where it's dropped, and how it will affect the game at that point in time.
Right. You want it to be so that if the player fails, they fail because of a lack of skill.
Yeah.
You know, that's what it is. When it comes down to it, their failure has to be because they couldn't rise to the challenge. Yeah. Or couldn't figure out your puzzles or whatnot.
And that's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Yeah.
So yeah, basically in the spreadsheet, if it's something that uses math, then you want to make a formula to balance it.
Now, when we say balance it, it's like, well, we've talked about all this stuff, but what about the actual balancing act? This is where we're going to have to step away and say we're teaching a higher level theory and not specific mechanics. Because once you create the maths, once you put in the formulas and you're seeing the numbers, then you as a developer have to figure out at each part of the game, and then we're talking stages of the story, geographical area, places inside of dungeons, where do you want the player to be at?
Yeah.
You have to decide that. We can't tell you. You know, we can tell you what we would do. We can't tell you what you should do.
Exactly.
All right, so that's balancing in a spreadsheet.
Yep. So let's go on to another way of balancing.
Our other way.
Our other way. It's just funny. Balancing your game inside your game.
Which is really important and useful for everything.
Yeah. So let's start on the character. The easiest thing to talk about is character abilities.
Right.
You want to look at each individual area of your game and determine what ability is needed to get through that area.
Right. So remember, we just talked about that with putting equations into your spreadsheet. You want to do pretty much the same thing inside the game itself. You want to take it section by section, piece by piece. It's like when you're editing a story, you take it paragraph by paragraph, sentence by sentence. When you're balancing your game, you take it section by section. And we mean get down to the minutia here.
Yeah.
Start off in Dungeon 1. Now take, the first floor of Dungeon 1. Now bring it down to this section, which is like a corridor and a room attached. A large room, a set of corridors that lead to doors, whatever. A frozen area of the lake, a pit that they can crawl down into, section by section by section. The more minutia you can get into, the better.
And what you're trying to do there is you're trying to see, can the player clear that particular area with the abilities that the characters have at that point.
Right. So you've given them spark and heal. Can they clear those areas with spark?
With spark and heal.
But then you want to go even a step further. Can you clear the area
with just one ability?
So now, can you clear this area with just spark? Can you clear this area with just heal and whacking it with your sword? Because if the player wants to employ a strategy that doesn't include spark, are they capable? Can it happen? Or are they automatically defeated? And that's where you're going to need to balance. If they're defeated, are they defeated because the strategy requires these two skills, spark and heal? Or are they defeated because if they don't use spark, they automatically lose?
Yeah.
There's a difference between the two. Is it strategic? Or are the numbers just not allowing it? If the numbers are just not allowing it, you have a balancing issue.
Yep, and you got to fix it.
But if it's strategic, then the player needs to rise to the challenge, and that's why you got to differentiate.
Yeah. So when you're doing your little run, and you're seeing what abilities are needed, how few can I use to get through this? Write this down. Record which parts require how many abilities.
Right. So
let's say that in Dungeon 1, in the first area, you have to have spark.
Right.
And
you have to use it.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of things from there. One, they have to have acquired spark. Okay, hopefully they start with it or they get it soon afterwards. Two, they have to have the MP to drive it if it's an MP-driven spell system. And that means that they have to have either the ability to heal passively, actively, maybe through defend, the MP score, or they get ethers, the MP healing items.
Right.
So, these are all part of the balancing. You can't just stop at one piece. You have to look at the cascade of how it works.
Yep.
If the only thing that's going to get them through Dungeon 1 is a skill that drains MP, there needs to be a way to recover their MP.
Yes, there does. Going off that example, so we use the example, Dungeon 1, you have to have spark to go through it.
Right.
But let's just say that the next area you have to have spark and heal.
Yeah.
You have to have both of them.
Right.
Well, you've got to do something. You got to draw the player's attention to that.
Right, and this is where you have good narration, good game narration, so your game narrative.
Because the player has to know,
Right.
Am I supposed to use this? Can I, am I supposed to use this here? And you can give them directives and clues.
And you don't have to tell them. They'll pick up on the nuances. Like, for example, if they've been clearing with Spark just fine, and they walk into an area, now you want them to have to learn how to use heal. Maybe it's a tutorial area, first dungeon, etc. Have the enemies up their damage. Not a lot, but just enough that they're like, wait a minute, I'm starting to get behind the 8-ball health-wise.
I've got 5 potions, and I've already used 3 of them.
Thank you.
So, I better start using this healing thing.
So now they have the heal mechanic. So now they're having to learn how to balance between sparking and healing and their regular attacks or whatever.
Yeah.
So they're changing their strategy to keep the game from dominating them. But when they do change their strategy, they get through. They don't dominate, but they get through. Then your game is balanced.
Yes.
But let's talk. So that was character strategies, and I think that segues really good into player strategies, which is kind of our next subtopic.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It does seg into player strategies.
Yeah.
You're going to do the same thing.
Right.
You want to focus on each individual area in your game.
Right. And then you want to write down the exact strategy that you as the developer use to clear it.
Yeah.
Keeping in mind that the player's not going to do what you, the developer, do. Never happens.
No.
Never happens.
It never happens.
The player's never going to clear the game the way you clear the game because you're the developer. So, what can we do to get around that?
Okay, so you need to attempt to clear the same area doing something completely different.
Yeah. So if you roll,
if you yourself can do this doing something different, great. You may want to have somebody else sit down and do it. But you need to record all attempts.
Right.
All the various ways that a person can get through the area. Your way and other ways.
So going back to the extremely rote example we were using earlier, if you know that you can get through this area using spark, defend, because defend recovers MP.
Yeah.
So if you know you can get through going spark, defend, try to get through the area without ever defending.
Yeah.
Or without ever using spark. And then have one of your testers go, okay, I need you to get through this dungeon without ever using the spark skill. Let me know if you can do it and how hard it is. Pretty much that.
Yeah, that's it.
Record all your successes, record all your failures.
All of it.
And how much success, how much failure. And then, we always talk about multiple solutions. So
you need to adjust your area to allow for these multiple solutions.
Yes.
Older
games that we've played back in the day.
Yeah.
Like someone will say, well, older games, only one solution got you through the area, and it was done in the games of yore. Well,
that was horrible, and they did it wrong.
Yeah, they did it wrong. So don't fall back on, older versions of games did this. They just because they did it wrong doesn't mean you get a free pass to do it wrong.
Yeah.
Balance your game, because once your game is balanced and there's multiple solutions through an area, and it's not just the developer's intended solution, then you're giving them a lot of chances to overcome these curveballs.
Absolutely.
To overcome these things their way. They feel like they beat your game, not they followed your formula to beat the game.
Yeah, let the player figure the way through.
Yeah. Give the player a chance to feel clever. Trust me, a player that feels clever in a game, that feel that they have overcome the curveballs that you, the GM, you, the developer, have thrown at them, the more they'll feel, hey, this is worth playing because I am smart.
And they will keep playing your game, and you hooked them.
Yeah.
We talk about that hook. Yep.
And you can keep on hooking them by making them feel smart. So let's talk more about actual obstacles. This can include enemies, but obstacles in general.
Okay. Yep. So you're going to want to focus on each individual obstacle in your game.
So that is an on-screen encounter, a trap, a bridge that needs to be lowered.
Yeah.
A pit that needs to be traversed, rapids that need to be crossed. I'm using a lot of physical obstacles, but it could also be boulder puzzles. Who doesn't like a nice boulder puzzle?
Oh, yes, boulder puzzles.
Push them rocks on switches
rocks.
Because the bad guys who make dungeons have no originality at all.
There's a manual.
But these are all obstacles.
Yeah.
You know.
So write down every way that obstacle can be cleared.
If you've listened to us talk about GDDs or LDDs, level design documents, we're always saying for every obstacle, it's good to come up with 3 solutions. However, you may not be able to do that immediately. It may not be apparent. You may try to program in 3, and 2 of them are very similar. So just record during the testing that we're talking about
during the testing part,
how many ways that obstacle can be cleared. So now,
actually do it.
Do it.
Clear the obstacles in those ways that you wrote down.
Because you're the developer.
See if it can be done.
Because you are the developer. Because you know exactly how the game is, air quotes, meant to be played.
Yes.
You should be able to clear each obstacle 100% of the time in every way. So if Boulder Puzzle can be cleared in 3 different ways, you should be able to three different ways clear it without fail.
Exactly.
100% all the time.
100%.
If a boss enemy can be defeated in any of the strategies, strategy A and strategy B, make it real simple. You should be able to use strategy A or B 100% of the time without fail. The RNG doesn't kill you.
That's right.
The game doesn't suddenly glitch. You know, there's no bugs. You can get through boss battle using strategy A and strategy B 100%. Because you're the developer. You know how the game works. You know the code. You know the formulas. If they don't, you need to go back into there and figure out why you, the person who created the game, doesn't know how the formulas work. That's a problem. But once you've done it,
now let somebody else do it.
Yeah.
Let somebody else try to clear it.
And give them the strategies and record following the strategies how well they do and don't do it.
Yeah. Yeah, you're going to record how often they clear using each of your strategies.
You're not sitting over their shoulder saying, okay, now press this button, now press this button.
No.
You're saying,
they do it.
Strategy 1 is this, strategy 2 is this, try it. And then they do it. And they'll come back to you and say, when I use strategy A, most of the time I'm successful. When I use strategy B, I just can't get a handle of it. I'm following your roadmap, and the enemy's still beating me more than half the time. So now remember, this is not, well, they're not good enough. You've told them what to do.
Yeah.
They need to be able to replicate what you're doing. And if in that second example, they're just having too many problems, then you probably need to start adjusting the obstacle itself.
Yep.
So that the tester can clear it most of the time, replicating your technique.
Yes.
Nothing we just mentioned is the players ad hocing figuring out how to do something. That third way you're never going to understand. That third way you're never going to predict.
Right.
That's fine. And when the player figures out that, what is the old adage of tabletop GMing? If you come up with 5 ways for a scenario to go, the players will figure out the 6th way.
Yeah, the players will do the 6th way.
So you don't try to account for that. Game developers who try to account for that and stop the players, don't do that. Let the players be really smart and figure out how to do something that you never considered. Because again, they feel smart.
Yes.
All right, so that's obstacles.
Okay, so let's deep dive a little further
the big one.
And talk about challenge.
The big one.
The challenge within your game.
Because I know we has to have people listening in live chat who are like, okay, well, what about challenge? Let's talk about challenge.
Yes. So, hey, you get to focus on every individual
obstacle
in the area.
All of them. Looking
at the challenge.
Yeah.
You want to have somebody else clear it.
Right.
With every solution that you come up with. Every one.
What that is your solution A, your solution B, your solution C, and then let them try to do it
their
own way.
And then watch them see if they can do it without effort every time.
Right.
Regardless of whatever solution they use.
So if they use solution A, how often do they succeed? If they use solution B, how often? C, how often? And just as importantly, if you say have at it and try to figure it out on your own, how often do they succeed?
Yeah.
And then once you do this, once you've done this and you've looked at it, if they can clear it more times than they fail it, leave it alone.
It's good.
Especially if they can clear it using their own solution. That's the big one.
Yes, it is.
If you try to tweak it to make it harder for them to use these ad hoc solutions, you're at this point tipping the balance against the player, and it's frustrating.
Yeah.
And they're gonna dislike it. Now, if they always
remember, you want the player to keep playing your game.
Right. But at the same time, you don't want to punish them for being smart, and you don't want to reward them for tapping the A button at the right time. This is not press X to win.
Yes.
Now,
On the flip side,
Right.
if your test player can always clear the obstacle, just always clear it,
awesome.
Then you want to adjust it so that you force them to use some kind of skill or character ability.
Right. So you're putting it, so if they're always clearing it, you want to tweak the difficulty up to where it's skill and ability.
Yes.
Because if they're just always clearing it, I mean, unless they're like an amazing player, and that's always possible, then it's more likely on the character side. Record that, look at that, analyze it. If they're clearing obstacles 100% of the time because they have press X to win, remove press X to win, change it, tweak it so that it's press X to help you win if you're a good player and you time it well.
Right,
you know? In other words, look at what they have that the character can do, and then make sure that they, as the player, have to have the skill that goes along with it.
Yeah.
It's going back to the Arkham example.
Yes, the Batman.
Right. If you have a power where Batman hits the ground and every enemy flies up in the air Superman style and goes ragdolling everywhere, maybe you don't want to use that. Maybe you want to have it so that the player has to do like a little QTE sequence in order to pull it off.
Yep.
Then it's balanced.
The last thing is for all these people who are testing your challenge and your obstacles, listen to their feedback.
Listen to it.
If people are telling you that it's too hard or it's frustrating, then
you need to know, because
you need to know that.
That's the flip side of what we just talked about.
Yeah.
If they're going through an area and they're saying, look, my character has these abilities, I've maxed out their perk tree, and no matter what, I just can't clear this area, you need to look, maybe those enemies are too hard. Maybe there's too many of them. Maybe the window for your QTE is too short.
Yeah.
Whatever that may be, there's a reason. If they have every advantage and you can clear the area, but they can't, you can clear the area because you're the GM. You're the developer.
You're a developer.
Tell them thinking about tabletop. You know exactly when to press a button. You know the exact frame in which hitting a button will exploit the combo concept. That kind of thing. You know exactly what to do and when. If they can't with the same skill tree, you probably need to dial that difficulty back.
Yeah, I would do that.
Because remember, players losing due to their own lack of skill, that's a good thing. That's how they learn.
That's how they learn. But if they're losing when they have everything and they shouldn't lose and they keep losing, they're going to get frustrated.
Yeah. If no matter what, no matter how good they are at button pressing, no matter how good they are at...
No matter how many perks they've loaded up...
None of that matters.
If none of that matters, then they're going to be frustrated and walk away from your game. And you don't want that.
You don't want that. You don't want that. A frustrated player is an X player.
Yeah.
All right. So now that we've rambled a lot, now it's time to take questions from our live audience.
If you've been watching, remember to use that podcast question feature in our chat.
Okay. So for those of you who are new, we don't actually monitor chat during this because we are busy doing a podcasting.
Yeah.
But we do monitor the questions that are being asked, and we see 2 of them.
Okay. So our first question comes from KB.
Excuse me.
KB asks, spreadsheet numbers question here.
Okay.
When starting off your balancing, in your experience or preference, is it best to start with everything at 1 and work up to the desired numbers, or start with a random number assigned to each attribute or something else?
Well, I'm going to assume based off of KV's question that it's talking about like in an RPG. I would say start with the lowest possible numbers and bring yourself up, in my preference. Don't bring in a random number. You start throwing random numbers in there. If you have no basis of where your numbers start, where are you going to know where they appear in the game and if you need to balance them? I mean, if you're testing a damage formula, that's one thing. Then you can throw in a random number and see what the output is.
Test, right?
Right. Hey, this damage formula is giving me the desired feedback, but that's not the same as balancing.
No, it's not. You want to start off with your minimum. You need to have your baseline.
That's absolutely what I would do. And I would say it's the baseline for where they would be in that area. So if they're going to be level 5 by the time they enter dungeon number 3, for example, then start at level 5.
Yeah.
That's what's called a minimum level requirement. Games do that. It's okay.
So, I mean, I'd say the place to start with 1 would be level 1 character in your first dungeon.
Yeah, why not? Especially if
because you can always raise that and go, you know what, I kind of need to have these skills at 2 or 3, but your baseline is established, in your first dungeon.
Yeah, the beginning of your game. And this is the reason we're using these terms, by the way, guys, is turn-based or ATB, whatever, battle RPGs in a battle engine. So things like your Final Fantasies, your Dragon Quests, etc. They're a really good litmus test for numerical balancing.
Yeah.
You can apply what we're talking about to legitimately everything, but it's really easy in a turn-based RPG to see the results of those numbers very quickly. So I'm pretty sure that's what KV is talking about. And yeah, start at your lowest level and just bring it all the way down, all the way up.
And then, like
level
I said,
100.
start your baseline, and then you can just go up from there.
Yeah, good question, KV. Good question.
All right, our next question is from Burke.
Okay.
Says, this has a bit more to do with UX, but this should be noted and discussed as well. Balancing showmanship and flow of the game loop.
In typical Burke fashion, not as much information as I would like to discuss the topic, but let's go ahead and talk about it. Love you, Burke. Okay, so balancing showmanship. I'm assuming that means showing off how the balancing works. You know, in other words, hey, I just beat this enemy in 3 hits. 2 levels later, I can beat him in 2 hits. I'm assuming that's what it means.
I'm assuming that showmanship means, hey, I can do the loop-de-loop and then woohoo and win.
Yeah.
This fight.
Right. It's an example.
Versus the flow of the game loop. Yeah.
Well, so again, the flow of the game loop, the gameplay loop, etc. is, so I am playing this game and I'm going through this dungeon and I'm fighting enemy. It is a very, walk, fight. So as I go through each fight, how does the enemy's damage, impede me? How does my balancing, my attacks beat the enemy? Am I coming out on top? Am I at an advantage? Am I at a disadvantage? Again, unfortunately, the question doesn't give us enough information to work with. So making these assumptions, the player needs to have feedback. They need to know
feedback
based on, how well they're doing in a dungeon, how long they have been, fighting through that dungeon, what their item burn rate is, etc. The feedback of numbers. Yeah. That's why damage pop-ups are real popular in a turn-based RPG. All right, so good question. Again, sorry, Burke, if that's not what you're asking, but that's what we were able to gain off of what your question was written. Oh, okay.
Burke follows up. Okay, I'll compliment that. It's basically balancing animation length against the flow of combat, for example.
Okay, yes. Okay, I think I understand that now. All right, so this is not related to actual game balancing, but like he said, UX. So, yeah, this information changes my answer completely. Long action sequences lost their vogue with Knights of the Round in Final Fantasy VII.
Ooh.
A 1:30 summoning, or however long that summon lasted. It seemed like it was forever.
Yeah.
There's no reason for that.
No.
It's okay to have occasional boss powers or super attacks that take a couple of seconds to come off because they're super flashy. The combos in Dragon Quest XI, I forgot what they're called. The ones that like the Luminary and his friends do. Those are never excessively long, but they're extremely flashy and they're eye candy. And they're difficult to pull off because everyone has to be in a pep state.
Right.
Pep powers, that's what they are.
Pep powers.
Everyone has to be in a pep state to pull it off. It's not something you can do every 5 seconds. Unlike Knights of the Round, where you just needed to have a goddamn rock.
Yeah.
That is, so the rock, the Knights of the Round is really bad for the UX.
Yeah, it is.
It was awesome at the time, and people were like, oh, that is so cool. And then the joke became when you had Quadra Summon, that would allow you to summon it 4 times in a row. And then you had X Summon, where you could choose it twice. So you were basically summoning Knights of the Round 8 times on Emerald Weapon. The joke was, do that and then go get yourself and make yourself a sandwich.
Yeah.
That was the joke. And you come back and Knights of the Round is still going on. You're still pummeling the shit out of Emerald Weapon. That's not good UX.
It was terrible UX.
It was great at the time for making a meme, but looking back on it, Final Fantasy VII did things a lot wrong, and that was the case. And then they made it even worse with Eden.
Yeah.
In Final Fantasy VIII, because you had to tap a damn button. That's no bueno. That's no bueno.
So, yeah.
But the pet powers, especially the ones that require everybody in Dragon Quest XI, is good.
Yeah.
Because they don't last that long.
They don't last that long.
Maybe 15 seconds.
There's a lot of criteria that goes into pulling one off.
Right. And they're flashy enough, and they communicate the awesomeness of the power of friendship with the Luminary enough that it pays off. There's a payoff.
Yeah. They were only like 10 seconds long.
No, like I said, like the longest one is like 15 seconds. It's not that long.
Right.
And it's super flashy, and you have to do a ton of shit to pull that one off.
Yeah, and it only happens one time. So that is a good example of balancing animation versus flow.
And while that is outside of game balancing, it's a good question to ask, because a lot of developers want to put in flashy moves. But some developers want to make the next Night of the Round, the next Supernova. Don't, unless it's something that is rare or something that has a lot of requirements.
Something that basically, I'm just going to say, okay, quote unquote, one-time use.
Yeah, quote unquote.
Then, yeah, okay.
If Supernova during the last Sephiroth battle had been something that Sephiroth did rarely, it would have been a lot more impactful.
Yeah.
But he literally, it's part of his strategy. He's like wall, shadow flare, something else, Supernova. And then the bitch repeats it.
Yep.
And that's all the last battle is. It loses its flavor after the third time Jupiter gets a hole punched in it.
Right.
Good question.
That's a good question.
Do we have any more podcast questions? If we don't, this is definitely one of the more complex podcasts we've done. And this is also one of the longer ones. We're actually banging at nearly an hour.
Yeah, game balancing is it's a complex topic, but it is a very, very important one, because this can break a game.
You are going to be very busy, guys. All developers listening out there, whether you be new, old hat, aspiring, indie, solo, etc., you're going to be doing this your entire career.
Yeah.
This is a skill you're never going to stop growing. This is a skill you're never going to stop learning new things about, because you're always going to have to figure out a way to make your game better balanced.
Yes.
I would say there's some extremely well-balanced games, and there are some that I would say are next to perfect, but I've never seen one that's completely perfect.
No.
Because if there was one that was completely perfect, every player playing it would be able to overcome it using their skill and feel like they had a rewarding, if not somewhat challenging experience, and that doesn't exist.
No.
There's too many player types out there. There's too many people out there. So your job as the developer isn't try to predict every possible solution, but to make it so that on the most basic level, the player's skill is what gets them through it.
Exactly. Oh, here we go. Burke has another one. If there was a perfect game with no balance issues, we would not have videos from the Spiffing Brit.
So we're gonna have to make a new rule where podcast questions aren't used for comments unless it's Burke being snarky. I love you, Burke.
That's Burke.
No, that's fine.
Love you, Burke.
True. That is true.
But it's very true.
Every game has an exploit. Every game has something that it could improve in, and yes, balancing is on the top of the list.
Yes, it is.
By the way, guys, I have feelings because he mentioned the Spiffing Brit. So I guess I'll talk about players discovering exploits. I do not believe a developer should be in a rush to shore up every single exploit. Obviously, do the ones that break your game. And if a influencer, a YouTuber, a streamer like the Spiffing Brit showcases an exploit in your game, first thing you want to do is ask, okay, how easy is it to pull off? Yeah. Because some of the stuff the Spiffing Brit pulls off takes some damn skill. Others are Skyrim. And if it's really easy to pull off, patch it. And then send a thank you to that streamer or YouTuber. Say, hey, thank you. Or if it's something that you either intended as a feature or you feel is a good feature that rewards a player for something clever, leave it.
Yeah, leave it alone.
And own it. And say, you know what, I didn't think of that, but now looking at it, if the player's clever enough to pull that off, let them have their OP. Yes. Let them have it. Yeah. You know, and someone, got which game it is, someone actually messaged the Spiffing Brit and said, you know, guys, we're going to call this a feature, and we want to thank you for pointing it out. And if the players can pull it off, bully to them. Let them wreck our game. Awesome. Yeah. So there it is. I think we are done. I don't see any more. Yeah. No more podcast questions. We want to thank every one of you who has been listening to us live. You guys are amazing. We don't watch chat, but I do see the viewer numbers, and they went up really nice today. So thank you guys.
Thank you guys for joining us on this odd day.
Yes, on this very odd day. And thank you again for anyone who's listening to us on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, etc., etc., etc. You guys make this a lot of fun.
Thank you.
So everyone, we love you lots, and join us next time on DLC Not Included. And remember,
anyone can give you the key, but you have to go through the door.